Three Deaths, a short story by Leo Tolstoy. 1. It was autumn. A carriage and a caleche were proceeding at a sharp trot along the high road. In the carriage sat two women. One of them was the mistress, thin and pale. The other was the maid, smug, florid and buxom. Her short, dry tresses peeped forth from under her faded bonnet. Her pretty hand in her torn glove readjusted them from time to time. Her swelling bosom, covered by a rug, was full of the breath of health. Her quick black eyes glanced at one moment out of the window at the scurrying fields, at another stared boldly at her mistress, or glanced uneasily at the comers of the carriage. Before the very nose of the waiting-maid, the bonnet of her mistress, attached to the netting of the carriage, rocked to and fro. On her knees lay a lapdog. Her legs were hunched up, the handbox standing on the floor of the carriage, and the drumming of her feet upon it was just audible amidst the creaking of the carriage springs and the clattering of the window glasses. With her hands on her knees and closed eyes, the mistress rocked softly on the pillows piled up behind her and kept on coughing an internal cough, at the same time slightly wrinkling her brows. On her head was a white nightcap, and a blue handkerchief was fastened round her fresh white neck. The straight parting, continuing beneath the nightcap, divided the reddish, extraordinarily flat, well-preserved hair, and there was something dry and death-like in the whiteness of the skin of this broad parting. The withered, somewhat yellowish skin hung somewhat loosely on the delicate and pretty face, and the cheeks and jaws had a pinkish hue. Her lips were dry and restless. Her travelling cloth dress lay in straight folds over her shrunken bosom. Notwithstanding that her eyes were closed, the face of the mistress expressed weariness, irritation, and suffering. The lackey, perched upon the box seat, was dozing. The post-driver, shouting vigorously, whipped up his sturdy, sweating team of four, glancing around occasionally at the other post-driver behind him in the caleche, who was bawling out just as lustily. The broad, double traces of the rapidly revolving tires extended evenly along in the chalky mud of the road. The sky was grey and cold. A cold mist enveloped the plain, and the road it was stuffy in the carriage, which smelt of eau de cologne and dust. The sick woman stretched back her head and gradually opened her eyes. Her large eyes were sparkling and of a very pretty dark colour.
"There it is again,"
she said, irritably shoving aside with her pretty wasted hand the corner of the crinoline of her maid, which had barely touched her leg, and her mouth pouted peevishly. The maid grasped her crinoline with both hands, rose for a moment on her sturdy legs, and sat a little further off. Her fresh face had a bright flush upon it. The beautiful dark eyes of the invalid greedily followed every movement of the maid. Presently, the mistress rested both arms on the seat of the carriage and also tried to raise herself in order to sit up a little higher, but her strength failed her. Her mouth pouted, and her whole face wore an expression of impotent, angry scorn.
"Help me, would you? It is really quite unnecessary. I can do it myself, only don't load me with your, what shall I call them? Your sacks, then. Have a little mercy. Better not touch me at all if you can't do better than that."
The mistress closed her eyes. Presently she quickly raised her eyelids again and glanced at her maid. The maid, as she returned her gaze, nibbled at her pretty lower lip. A deep sigh arose from the invalid's breast, but the sigh ended in a cough. She turned aside, puckered her brow, and grasped her bosom with both hands. When the cough ceased, she closed her eyes again and continued to sit motionless. The carriage and the caleche entered a village. The maid drew her plump hand from beneath her jacket and crossed herself.
"What is it?"
asked her mistress.
"A posting station, my lady."
"Why did you cross yourself?"
I ask.
"We passed the church, my lady."
The invalid turned to the window and began slowly to cross herself, looking with all her big eyes at the large village church, round which the invalid's carriage was just then passing. The carriage and caleche stopped together at the posting station. Out of the caleche stepped the sick woman's husband and the doctor, who came up to the carriage.
"How are you now?"
asked the doctor, taking her hand and feeling her pulse.
"Are you not a little tired, my friend?"
inquired her husband in French.
"Don't you want to get out?"
The maid, looking after her wraps, squeezed herself into a corner so as to be as much out of the way of the conversation as possible.
Pretty much the same as before, but it doesn't matter,
replied the invalid.
I won't get out.
The husband, after pausing a short time, went into the post station. The maid, skipping out of the carriage, tripped lightly on the tips of her toes over the mud into the open door.
My feeling bad is no reason why you should not have your breakfast,
said the invalid, smiling slightly at the doctor who was standing at the carriage window.
Not one of them mind me,
added she, as soon as the doctor had, with noiseless step, quitted her and darted up the steps of the post station like a lynx.
They are well, so it is all one to them. Oh my God.
"I tell you what, Edward Ivanovich,"
said the husband, encountering the doctor and pressing his arms with a merry smile.
"I have ordered them to bring us a drink. What do you say to that?"
"Oh, that's all right,"
replied the doctor.
"And what about her?"
asked the husband with a sigh, lowering his voice and raising his brows.
"I say that she cannot go as far as Italy. Please God she may reach Moscow, especially this weather."
My God, what's to be done then?"
And the husband put his hand over his eyes.
"Here,"
he added, addressing the man who was bringing the drink.
"The idea must be given up,"
answered the doctor, shrugging his shoulders.
"But tell me what I am to do,"
insisted the husband.
"You know I have done everything to prevent her. I spoke about my means and about the children whom we should have to leave behind, and about my affairs, and she would listen to nothing. She makes her plans for living abroad just as if she were quite well. And to tell her of her real condition, well, you might just as well kill her outright."
"She's as good as dead already. You ought to know that, Vasily Dmitrievich. A person can't live when he has no lungs, and lungs can't grow again. It is melancholy, miserable. But what's to be done? All that you and I can now do is to take care that the rest of the road is as easy as possible. This is now a case for a priest."
"Ah, my God, you understand my position. How can I remind her of her last will? Come what may, I cannot tell her that. You know how good she is."
"Nevertheless, you ought to try and persuade her to stop till the winter season,"
said the doctor, shaking his head significantly.
"And then the roads might be bad."
"Aksusha! Aksusha!"
screamed the daughter of the postmaster, throwing a shawl round her head and dashing down the muddy back staircase.
"Come and look at Lady Shekinskaya. They say she's going abroad for breast sickness. I have never seen how consumptives look before."
Aksusha leaped across the threshold, and the pair of them, taking each other by the hand, ran out to the gate. Slackening their steps, they passed close to the carriage and stared into the open window. The invalid turned her head towards them, but observing their curiosity, frowned and turned away.
"Little mother!"
cried the postmaster's daughter, quickly turning her head round.
How wonderfully beautiful she used to be. And what is she now? It is frightful. Did you see her? Did you see her, Aksusha?
"And how lean!"
chimed in Aksusha.
"Come, let us see what is in the bottom of the coach. Look, she has turned away, and I have not seen half. What a pity, Masha."
Yes, and how muddy it is."
And they both ran back through the gate again.
I suppose I do look frightful,
thought the invalid.
Oh, only let us make haste, and go abroad, and then I shall soon pick up again.
"Well, how are you now, my friend?"
said the husband, coming to the carriage and still chewing a morsel of something.
Always the same question,
thought the invalid.
Anyhow, it doesn't seem to interfere with his appetite. Oh, it's nothing,
she murmured between her teeth.
"I'll tell you what, my friend. I fear you'll be all the worse for the journey, especially in this weather, and Edward Ivanovich says the same thing. What do you say to turning back home?"
She was too angry to speak.
"The weather may be better presently. We could postpone the journey, and you would then be better. We might all go together."
Pardon me. If I hadn't listened to you all this time, I might have been in Berlin by now and quite well again.
What was to be done, my angel? You know it was quite impossible. But if you would only stop at home for a month, say, you would get ever so much better. I could complete my business, and we might take the children.
The children are well, but I am not.
But my friend, just think, what with this weather, suppose you grew worse on the road, while at home at any rate.
Home indeed. Why, I should only die at home,
replied the sick woman passionately. But the word die plainly frightened her. She grew silent and looked interrogatively at her husband. He cast down his eyes and was silent. The mouth of the invalid suddenly put on a childish pout, and the tears flowed from her eyes. Her husband covered his face with his pocket handkerchief and withdrew from the carriage.
No, I will go,
said the invalid, raising her eyes to heaven, and she folded her arms and began to mutter incoherently.
Why is it so? Why is it so? My God, she said, and the tears flowed still more violently. She prayed long and fervently, but her bosom remained just as sick and sore. In the sky, in the fields, on the road, everything remained just as grey and dull, and that autumn mist, neither denser nor thinner, lay just as before over the mud of the road, and over the roofs of the cottages, and over the carriages and the sheepskins of the post-drivers, who, conversing together with strong and merry voices, were oiling the wheels of the vehicles and putting fresh horses to.